In early 1980, a bizarre major case shocked the entire city. The victim was a Chinese teacher whose body was found in a strange pose, suspended inside an abandoned teaching building. He died from a blade wound through his back. Before dying, the victim used his own blood to draw a strange triangle. The Public Security Bureau received 300 letters with theories about the case, but none guessed the killer correctly. The incident happened 45 years ago at Longquan District No. 2 Middle School, the best junior high in the area, located on the eastern edge of the city. On March 12, 1980, the homeroom teacher for class to be arrived first as usual to open the classroom. After turning on the lights, she noticed something on the blackboard, which had been wiped clean the day before, now had new writing on it. When she stepped onto the platform to look closely, her face turned deathly pale. The handwriting was exactly that of Teacher Zhu, who had been missing for over 6 months and was rumored to be dead. Teacher Zhu was a top Chinese teacher at the school, 45 years old, and had won the district's Outstanding People's Teacher Award. 6 months earlier, a girl in his class named Suru had jumped to her death. Suru was exceptionally beautiful and known as the Skullflower. Her family claimed she had been assaulted by a teacher and killed herself in despair, though she left no suicide note and they had no solid suspect. Classmates said Suru was good at Chinese and close to Teacher Zhu. He even gave her meal tickets for extra food and taught her to play the harmonica in his office. After her death, Teacher Zhu became the prime suspect and was restricted to campus. A few days later, he mysteriously disappeared from the teacher's dormitory. Rumors spread that he had climbed the wall and fled, and some even called for revenge. Later, a body resembling his was found downstream in a nearby river, but it was too decomposed for positive identification given the crude forensic methods of the time. Most people assumed he had killed himself out of guilt. No one expected that more than half a year later, the handwriting of this supposed suicide would appear on the blackboard of Class to B. The school leaders took it seriously and had people who knew Zhu's writing examine it. They all agreed it matched perfectly, and students pointed out that the poem Zhang Zhu and its explanation over 100 characters were identical to what Zhu had written in class a year earlier, down to the size and layout. The news caused an uproar. Some began claiming Zhu was innocent and had returned at night to write the poem as a cry from the grave. Most leaders thought it was a student's prank and just ordered tighter night patrols. But the very next day, the same handwriting appeared on the blackboard of Class 3C, this time with a poem by Yin Shu. Since the dorms had been strictly guarded, it couldn't have been a student. Could it have been one of the teachers staying overnight? But those teachers had never attended Zhu's classes on those poems, so they couldn't have copied them so accurately. The story spread among students and grew wilder. Some claimed to have seen Zhu's shadow lecturing at night with a mournful voice. Others said they heard Suru's cries from the storage room. The leaders, worried about the social impact during the crackdown on superstition, added more people to patrol the teaching buildings. With only 2 security guards, they recruited 3 teachers to help. Fang, the head of security, an over 50 old man and relative of the principal. Xiao Wei, a veteran whose eyes were injured, so his night vision was poor. Song Hua, the Chinese teacher and Zhu's nephew, easygoing and smooth. Old Wang, the math teacher, strong and had taught the dead Suru. And Old Chen, the physics teacher, usually timid but now competing with Song for a female teacher, so he joined to save face. At 9:30 p.m., students finished self-study and returned to the dorms with nothing unusual. At 10:30, the 5 men checked every classroom and confirmed all was normal. At 11 p.m., they decided to take turns patrolling the 2 teaching buildings in the order Fang, Xiao Wei, Song Hua, Old Wang, Old Chen each for half an hour, blowing a whistle if anything happened, while the others stayed in the gatehouse playing cards. By 1:30 a.m., 1 full round was complete with nothing amiss. By 2:30 a.m., Fang and Xiao Wei had finished their shifts with no issues. Then it was Song Hai's turn, but by 3:10 a.m. 10 minutes past the handover he still hadn't returned. Old Wang sensed something wrong, so the 4 grabbed flashlights and quickly searched the buildings but found no sign of him. Since the campus was large, they split up to search different areas, wishing if they found anything. Round 3:40 a.m., they regrouped. Song was still missing. Fang guessed he might have gone home early, but no one knew his exact address, only that he lived with his mother in the tile-roofed area on the west side of the city. Xiao Wei remembered there was a staff roster in the gatehouse, so they went back to check it. By then, fear was spreading among them. Old Chen nervously suggested Zhu might have returned at night, run into Song, and harmed him. Old Wang even suspected Zhu and Song had some hidden grudge and Zhu had come specifically to kill him. While arguing, They reached the gatehouse, found the address, and Xiao Wei went to check. Before leaving, he opened the playground gate so anyone leaving the school would have to pass through it. After he left, Fang locked the main gate again to prevent anyone sneaking in. They searched the playground for a while until Fang, exhausted, went back to rest in the gatehouse. It was now 4 a.m., so Old Wang and Old Chen sat on a stone bench chatting, waiting to see what happened. 20 minutes later, Fang suddenly came back and said he remembered one place they hadn't checked: the long-abandoned art building. It had once burned someone to death and fallen into disrepair during the era's criticism of art education, so it was now used for storage. When they arrived, they found the door lock had been pried open. Fang stayed downstairs to guard while Old Wang and Old Chen went up with flashlights. The building had 3 floors with a central corridor and rooms, stairs at both ends, full of cobwebs and peeling paint after years of neglect. They checked the first and second floors with nothing unusual, but when they reached the 3rd floor and shone their lights down the corridor, they were terrified by what they saw: a person hanging with his head drooping, motionless. Old Chen, being timid, tried to run, but Old Wang stopped him and they approached together. It was a missing teacher Song. He had been stabbed in the back, blood staining the floor. His arms and torso tied with rope that went over a pipe above the corridor and was secured to a hook on the wall in front of him. Behind him was a broken fire extinguisher rack with a sharp knife fixed to it. Old Wang checked Song's breathing and found none, so they ran downstairs and called the police. Soon after, Xiao Wei returned. He and Song's mother confirmed Song hadn't gone home. The police station, recognizing the seriousness, reported it to the District Public Security Bureau. The case was assigned to my grandfather Tao Sai's team. He immediately led people to the scene. Examination showed Song's coat had been removed, with multiple blunt force injuries on his upper body. The fatal wound was from a long dagger about 35 centimeters long, inserted from a slightly lower angle, missing the heart but causing massive bleeding and death. Time of death was estimated after 4 a.m., after Old Wang and Old Chen had sat chatting facing the art building. Strangely, if anyone had come out of the only door, the 2 teachers would have seen them, and Fang had been guarding downstairs the whole time until police arrived. So the killer couldn't have escaped then. The killer had vanished right under their noses. A thorough search of the scene turned up only to valuable clues. First, a diary page on the body that, after authentication, described how Song had repeatedly harassed Tsuru. Second, although Song was suspended by ropes, his toes could barely touch the ground. Before dying, he had used his toe dipped in blood to leave a triangle-like symbol. The next day, a special task force was formed. After reviewing the case, several questions rose. 1. Song disappeared during his second patrol round, so he must have encountered trouble then, but he was stabbed to death after 4 a.m. Who controlled him in between? 2. All exits of the building were under observation. How did the killer escape? Was one of the 3 lying? 3. Tsuru's diary pointed to Song as a molester, and the supposedly dead Zhu's handwriting had appeared mysteriously. Could Zhu still be alive, hidden for 6 months, and killed Song to avenge Tsuru? Forensic methods back then were crude, but my grandfather Tao Sai, based on experience, believed the murder was committed in a hurry and must have left traces. He suggested re-examining the body and clothing more carefully. Sure enough, after forensic doctor Yang Chuengshuan's detailed check, a small amount of chalk dust was found under the victim's fingernails. Yang Chuengshuan was a teacher borrowed from the district health school to act as forensic doctor. She taught there normally but helped the police when needed. My grandfather said although she was a young woman, after handling many criminal cases she had become very fond of solving mysteries, though her deductions were usually wrong. Yang Chuengshuan thought the chalk dust was a clue worth digging into. Yang Chuengshuan came up with a theory. The victim was a teacher, so it wasn't unusual for him to have chalk dust under his fingernails on a normal day. However, the victim had already washed up before participating in the night patrol that evening. Under normal circumstances, there shouldn't have been any chalk dust left. In other words, the victim must have used chalk during the patrol. Following this line of thinking, Song Hui must have been the one who wrote the earlier Blackboard messages imitating teacher Zhu. He was trying to convey some secret, unspeakable information to a certain person in the school through these imitations, but ended up being murdered to silence him. Perhaps Song Hui knew the inside story of teacher Zhu's disappearance. As soon as this inference was made, many colleagues immediately applauded Yang Chuengshuan on the spot, only to be slapped in the face by my grandfather right there. Why not think in the opposite direction, he said. What if the killer wrote the Blackboard messages and Song Hui erased them? That would also leave chalk dust in his fingernails. Upon hearing this, Yang Zhuangxuan and her supporters fell silent. The chalk dust clue could not be pursued further. The task force then turned to studying the message the victim left before dying. The mystery of that strange triangle symbol. Triangle is a common mathematical symbol, so some officers thought it might be secretly pointing to the math teacher, Old Wang. Yang Zhuangxuan guessed it referred to the physics teacher Old Chen, since he and Song Hui were both pursuing the same female teacher, forming a love triangle. This view was supported by most comrades in the task force. My grandfather secretly mocked their thinking as shallow. If the victim knew the killer's identity, why would he express it so obscurely with a symbol? He proposed a bold, out-of-the-box inference. Perhaps the triangle symbol meant the clue was hidden in the victim's triangle-shaped underwear. However, after thoroughly searching the underwear, they found nothing. The blood triangle clue also stalled. That afternoon, this bizarre case made the front page of the local newspaper. A missing teacher's handwriting mysteriously reappeared on the blackboard at midnight. A night patrol teacher was mysteriously murdered, and the killer magically vanished inside a locked building. The case shocked Wrong City overnight, and discussing the killer's method became the hot topic across all sectors of society. There were several mainstream speculations from the public. Teacher Zhu had not died. He secretly sneaked back into the school, knocked Song Hui unconscious while he was patrolling alone at night, dragged him to the art building, and killed him. But those who held this view could not explain how the killer Zhu escaped the building right under the other staff members' eyes. Song Hui committed suicide, overwhelmed by guilt for assaulting Suru. He killed himself to atone. However, those who supported this theory could not explain how Song Hui managed to hang himself and stab himself in the back with a knife. The four people present that night conspired to kill Song Hui and then fabricated an elaborate lie, turning the case into an impossible crime. This theory was eventually ruled out after the police conducted multiple separate interrogations of the parties involved. 3 days after the incident, at 4 a.m., my grandfather went to the crime scene to reconstruct the events and look for overlooked clues. According to Yang Zhuangxuan's autopsy conclusions, Song Hui was knocked unconscious with a blow, his mouth stuffed, tied with ropes, and hung in the corridor. To better experience the victim's situation, my grandfather closed his eyes to simulate unconsciousness. A colleague tied him up, gagged him in one of the rooms on the 3rd floor of the art building, and then carried him to the corridor to hang him up. The knotting method and hanging height were all recreated exactly as in the photos. The art building at night was deathly silent and terrifying. My grandfather opened his eyes and saw only blurry darkness. He tried to shout and struggle, but it was futile. Since the killer wanted to murder Song Hui, why go to such great lengths knocking him out and hanging him in this horrifying building before stabbing him in the back instead of just killing him immediately? Unless the killer had no choice but to do it this way. Although my grandfather felt it more vividly, it still didn't help the case, and he still didn't understand the meaning of the blood triangle. After they untied his gag, Yang Zhuangxuan suddenly said, "The atmosphere in this corridor feels a bit different from that night." Reminded by her, my grandfather realized something was off. That's right, the lighting. On the night of the crime, the big lights on the playground had been turned on while searching for Song Hui, so the 3rd floor was noticeably brighter. A colleague immediately went to the gatehouse electrical room and turned on the big lights. Once the lights were on, only my grandfather and Yang Zhuangxuan remained in the corridor. Although the light was brighter, my grandfather imagined Yang Zhuangxuan as the killer. The pale light cast on her cold face made him shiver involuntarily. Suddenly, Yang Zhuangxuan disappeared. My grandfather was startled, only to realize she had walked behind him to check the knots. At that moment, my grandfather had a sudden realization. He urgently asked Yang Zhuangxuan to let him down and shouted, "It's solved! The blood triangle mystery is solved!" The next evening, my grandfather had the task force bring the 4 parties back to the scene. As soon as everyone was gathered, he said, "The killer is among the 4 of you." The group was first shocked, then protested. "How is that possible? We all have alibis." Indeed, on the night of the crime, the victim was stabbed after 4 a.m. At that time, Old Wang and Old Chen were chatting on the playground, and Xiao Wei was with Song Hai's mother. Fang was alone but couldn't have entered and exited under Old Wang and Old Chen's watch. So in theory, none of the 4 had the opportunity to commit the crime. My grandfather calmly replied. Although the victim was stabbed after 4 a.m., the killer used a clever setup that allowed him to escape before 4 a.m. The killer first knocked Song Hui unconscious, hung him in the corridor, and tied the rope to a rusty iron hook in front. When Song Hui woke up, The corridor was pitch black. He found himself bound and struggled in vain. However, the other four had turned on the big playground lights while searching for him. The light shone into the art building, and Song Hui could now see his situation clearly. He was hanging in the corridor with the rope tied to the iron hook in front. He discovered his toes could touch the ground. Driven by a strong will to survive, Song Hui began an attempt. He tried to lean his body forward as much as possible without moving his toes, hoping to kick the rope knot off the hook with his feet. As he struggled, his body swung with greater and greater amplitude. What he couldn't see was that behind him, on the fire extinguisher rack, a long sharp blade was fixed, aimed at his chest. As his swinging intensified, his back slammed hard into the dagger. The blade pierced his chest cavity, and Song Hui instantly lost strength. When he realized what had happened, with his last bit of energy he left a clue, dipping his toe in blood to draw a triangle. In fact, the bottom of the triangle he drew had a curved line rather than a straight one, but in his dying state, it was hard to draw it perfectly. The symbol he left was meant to tell others that his body had swung back and forth. There were still accidents. The dagger ultimately missed his heart. However, the blade was too long and too sharp. Once it pierced the chest cavity and he remained hanging without rescue, he would still bleed out and die. Yang Zhuangshuan said, "Your hypothesis is somewhat interesting. But you say the killer is among the four." When Song Hui went on patrol, the others were all together in the gatehouse playing cards. How could anyone split off to deal with him? My grandfather replied. Song Hui's disappearance during patrol wasn't because he was abducted at the beginning. He hid himself voluntarily. Yang Zhuangshuan asked, "Why would he hide voluntarily?" "How do you know?" The killer had obtained the diary left by the skullflower Suru and left its contents in the blackboard to arrange a meeting with Song Hui at the art building. During his patrol, Song Hui discovered the blackboard message left by the killer. He was extremely wary of that diary, so he had no choice but to go to the meeting. At the same time, he erased the writing on the blackboard, which is why there was chalk dust in his fingernail crevices. Therefore, the killer actually subdued Song Hui later. During the time when everyone split up to search for him, the killer sneaked alone to the art building, knocked Song Hui unconscious, completed the hanging setup, then sneaked back out and rejoined the group normally. But according to what you said, all four had the opportunity. Also, since the killer had already left, why didn't Song Hui just write the killer's name? Because this plan might not have worked perfectly. Although the killer must have rehearsed it many times, accidents could still happen. For example, the dagger missing or not going in deep enough, or Song Hui being discovered too early. That's why the killer had to commit the crime wearing a mask. This also explains why Song Hui couldn't identify the killer. Since the killer wore a mask, he must have prepared items like a mask, robe, and gloves. These items had to be disposed of after the crime. On the night of the incident, Old Wang, Old Chen, and Section Chi Feng never left the school. Among the four, only Xiao Wei had left the school. On the way from the school to Song Hui's mother's house, there are two garbage stations. My grandfather and his team carefully searched them and found a black robe and traces of discarded gloves. One glove still had a partial finger piece left, and the fingers had some rust marks that matched the rusty iron hook where the rope was tied in the art building. Section Chi Feng confirmed those were the gloves Xiao Wei had worn. Therefore, Xiao Wei was the killer. Faced with my grandfather's incisive, step-by-step reasoning, Xiao Wei quickly broke down. He confessed, because he was handsome and skilled in martial arts. He won the affection of the skullflower Suru, and her beauty was impossible to resist. The two developed feelings in secret. However, Suru was assaulted by Song Hui. In despair, she jumped into the river and drowned. At the time, teachers who knew about this. In grief, he clearly realized that with only the diary, it would be hard to bring Song Hui to justice. So Su decided to use the diary to blackmail Song Hui every year for money to compensate Suru's parents. Even if the diary was made public, it might not convict Song Hui, but it could ruin his marriage, career, and reputation. But Su discovered that Song Hui was ruthless and planned to kill him, so he handed the diary to Xiao Wei for safekeeping. 3 days later, Song Hui indeed killed teacher Zhu and dumped the body in the river, but he never found the diary. Meanwhile, after Xiao Wei received the diary, he saw Zhu disappear and suspected he had been murdered. He investigated privately for a long time but couldn't find solid evidence against Song Hui. By chance, he obtained several photos of teacher Zhu lecturing that clearly showed his blackboard writing. So Xiao Wei secretly practiced imitating Zhu's handwriting and slowly planned this scheme. In this case, although Xiao Wei could be somewhat understood emotionally, His methods were too insidious and vicious, and the crime occurred in a school. He was sentenced to death by the court and executed by firing squad in December that year,